All right, welcome everybody to the Lakers Legacy Podcast, where Noah's Ark. How about Noah's Mark? Because Rob Pelinka just built us a ship, a championship. Oh, yeah, and it's raining in LA. What a world! What an NBA trade deadline. By far the most impactful and landscape shifting trade deadline in the last 20 years, possibly in the history of the NBA, definitely when it comes to the Lakers. Anyways, I'm your host, Jonathan Hernandez, and I'm joined by my co host, Tommy Alexander. And Tommy, how much cook did Rob Pelinka cook?
He cookity cooked.
Five-star Michelin chef Robbie Pelinka, I mean. Okay,
Polenta.
so the NBA trade deadline, the 2025 NBA trade deadline has just ended. The Lakers didn't do anything else, but I don't think they needed to, given the bombshell that dropped last night at around 9 p.m. The Lakers have now acquired Mark Williams for Dalton Connect, a 2030 first round pick unprotected, a 2030 pick swap, and Cam Reddish in what was probably the second most shocking deal of this trade deadline behind Luka Doncic. Um, Now we head to the buyout market, but first, Tommy, let's start macro first. How would you describe this trade deadline by Rob Pelinka? What grade would you give him? And let's take it back to, starting with DFS. Now we have Luka Doncic and Mark Williams. It still boggles my mind that this is our team because the last week feels like 2 months. And I think back to the start of this season when the Lakers started off 3-0 and Anthony Davis was averaging 30 points a game. And we were like, here we go, off to the races. We just need to keep this pace by the trade deadline. And then we're going to get the upgrades we need. And we're taking this home. And that seems like an entirely different season now at this point. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it, but with regards to how Robbie P did this trade deadline, what grade would you give him?
I feel like I have to give him a solid A. Um, the way that he was able to, first of all, I mean, starting with the DFS trade, which was like good by itself, addressing needs for the team that we had built at the beginning of the season, but just like, something that you and I talk about a lot is just like acquiring this archetype of player that really fits with anyone. The Lakers' MO, whether it's through trades or through the draft, is, to get their stars eventually, or free agency, I guess, although that, is a little bit more rare. But, building out a team of guys like DFS and having a backlog of those DFS Max Christie, like Vando, like that archetype, continuing to build that out in the background is extremely helpful. And so, start off with that. And then that sort of gives you, the ability. It's like, okay, Luka Doncic becomes available for your franchise big man, but, you know, you can trade for Luka and not completely gut your team. I mean, you're still going to roll forward with a competitive team. And then it's like, okay, well, now you're you already needed a center. Maybe it's like a little more glaring. And then you go out and get like one of the best young centers in the NBA. Certainly one of the young centers in the NBA with among the most upside. And so, the fact that he was able to do all of this with the limitations that we sort of had,
Mm-hmm.
we made our pick this year, so we only had two future tradable firsts. Before we traded AD, those firsts were probably too valuable, for like anything that we were trying to do. But then it's like, once you trade AD, it's like you have to recalibrate the value of those firsts and the value of your swaps over the next few years, because it's not like, well, LeBron might retire after next season and then AD might demand a trade. It's like there's a vision now. And other teams can see that too, So the fact that he was able to pivot and suddenly and then quickly, sort of recalibrate on the value of his own assets in the context of, the current roster, I think is amazing. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I have no doubt that what we ended up paying for Mark Williams was very similar to what we wanted to pay for Walker Kessler. I assume we offered maybe something slightly more. In term I guess, like, I don't know, then it's like, we always talked about unprotecting the 2027 pick, but it was only top four protected, so, like, I don't know, we'll talk about this when
Yeah.
we talk about the swaps, but this comes down to, like, a probability analysis. It's like, what are the chances you're even going to be top four in 2027, have a top four pick in 2027 when Luke is on the team? So, the fact that he was able to get all of this done and reshape the team in this way, I was fully prepared after the Luka trade to just, like, we'll play the waiver market for, like, a veteran plotting center to, like, fill some minutes behind Hayes, and we'll basically rely on some combo of Hayes, this buyout plotting center, and our forward rotation to fill the 5 minutes. And he went out and got, like, a guy who helps now. I mean, it's a significant upgrade now, but also, like, moving forward is
Mhm.
like an incalculable almost upgrade. So
Yeah.
yeah, solid A. I no notes. He used the assets very well. Yeah, so I give him a solid A just because of his ability to sort of, like, not just the talent we got back, which is obviously, like, game changing, but also, like, how he was able to quickly pivot between what he probably thought he was supposed to be building, for months and months and months, into we get
Mhm.
Luca, now what comes next, and then immediately executing the next move. And then setting himself up for all of this by acquiring DFS first at a pretty reasonable
Yeah.
price. And DFS is like a player that could fit with any roster you're trying to build. So
For sure. And I think he timed all of those moves, whether it was intentional or not, very well. Because if you get Luca first, you're not sure whether you'll be able to fill out the rest of your roster properly because everybody knows you have Luca. But anyways, I want to talk more about Rob Pelinka later and get into further detail of how he was able to masterfully maneuver all of these moves, because I think there's a misconception by fans that all of this stuff just fell into his lap. And to a certain extent, that is true, but I want to go into detail of why that really isn't the case. And this was a true masterclass by Rob Pelinka. But first, let's talk about the deal that he just made last night, the Mark Williams deal. That one, I can't handle all of these surprises and shock, Tommy. The Luka Doncic was one thing, and then the Mark Williams thing. I did not have him on my radar at all. Obviously, I know who Mark Williams is. He was actually on my fantasy basketball team the last 2 years, but I had always kind of just put him in the back burner of my mind because they just traded Nick Richards. He is their lone starting center. Yes, they have Musa Diabate, but he's their most recent lotto pick and their big man of the future. I did not think that he was available. But kind of like with the Luca deal, sometimes all it takes is for another GM to be interested in a particular, very specific player that you have on your roster, and then things open up from there. Because I don't think Mark Williams was actually available to the rest of the league. It's just the fact that the Charlotte Hornets wanted very specifically Dalton Connect, just like the Dallas Mavericks very specifically wanted Anthony Davis. And Rob Pelinka just so happened to be in the right place and time with enough of the right assets to be able to execute and close these deals. So, in a nutshell, I think this was a bold move and big swing by Rob Pelinka to get a guy like Mark Williams, who isn't without his red flags and concerns. Obviously, his most healthiest season in the NBA thus far has been a 46 game season, so that's a little concerning. And as people have probably realized by now, if they scroll the Twitter timeline, there are some pretty questionable concerns with Mark Williams' defensive aptitude, apart from his insane freakish measurables and his athleticism. But having said that, I do think it was a bold move that Rob Pelinka needed to swing. Um, and he essentially, kind of like what you mentioned earlier, fulfilled the exact thing he needed to fulfill. He got a starting caliber center for Luka Doncic. And I think that's important because, we talk about the 2031st first, and we like to assume that that first has gone down in value because Luka Doncic is on the team. Well, Tommy, Luka Doncic being on the team is not a certainty, actually. He's
Yeah,
up for
but
extension soon. He's only on for one more year. And so in the now, Rob Pelinka has to make sure that he does everything to keep Luka Doncic here. He did that with the Mark Williams move. Whether or not it pays off dividends further on down the line, he kind of needed to do something to show Luka now, hey, we can win this year and in the immediate future as well. Whereas I don't know what would have happened if we had gotten just like a Dayron Sharp, and I actually like Dayron Sharp, maybe like a Clint Capella, right? And things just go south this season, and Luka Doncic isn't having a good time. Who knows what would have happened? This isn't the first time that a major free agent got traded to the Lakers and then walked, Dwight Howard. So by making this deal, Rob Pelinka showed Luka Doncic that he's serious about building around him. So yeah, what are your thoughts about this deal? Again, it's a big bet on Mark Williams, his health, his defensive improvement. To me, this is like a two things can be true sort of deal. In a vacuum, I do think this was an overpay for an unproven big man like Mark Williams. But at the same time, number two, it's a deal that I would have done like 9 out of 10 times. And I'm glad Rob took the swing, even if it doesn't necessarily pan out the way he wants it to pan out, even 3 years down the line. Um, so for me, like I very much approve of this deal. I'm very intrigued by Mark Williams' crazy 9'9" standing reach, nearly 7'7" wingspan. I think he has tremendous upside and potential. I just don't think it's the slam dunk deal that most people are making it out to be. Though I do understand getting caught up in the excitement of just having this 7 foot freak in your gym and your roster at 23 years old. I just think that this is more of like a TBD 50-50 proposition that this could work out, but this also might not work out. Um, and I say that it might not work out mainly because I believe there's a pretty big opportunity cost here to making this deal where we did trade two key assets out in Dalton Connect and the 2031 first that can be flipped for other things. Maybe this summer too, after we've seen what this roster looks like and what we actually need, and we get a little bit more intel. I think that's what we gave up in doing this deal. Not the least of which we gave up Dalton Connect, and I want to make sure that we don't in the process of pumping up and getting excited about Mark Williams, I want to make sure that we don't downplay Dalton Connect too. Yes, he's terrible defensively, but he has done things in his rookie season offensively that have been unparalleled by other rookies in the history of the NBA. Okay, so this was a loss, and there was a reason why the Charlotte Hornets specifically pinpointed Dalton Connect as their target. And so I believe both GMs and both teams made their valuations on the future on both of these prospects. We'll see who ends up being right. But for now, even if we're not talking about future projections, I think both teams sort of fulfilled a specific need that their team needed. So, what are your thoughts on the Mark Williams deal?
yeah, so my overall thought is, I mean, yeah, we there's of course risk. There's risk in every trade. In the AD trade with Luca, AD could be an Iron Man the rest of his career, and Luca gets injured tomorrow and is out for his career's over. I like, of course, there's always these rabbit holes that we can sort of go down. I just think that Dalton is not like a proven asset himself, right? Like I know that Dalton, we know him because he's played on this team, but he's had trouble at times cracking the rotation due to, frankly, basketball IQ issues on both ends. I mean, I was at the game on Tuesday. It was the second time this season, right? And that at least that I've been paying attention because I watch a lot of games on DVR, and maybe you miss the subtleties and with the coaches and how they're interacting with the players. But first time, the clip that went viral of JJ calling a timeout and like yelling at Dalton for screwing up his, where he was supposed to be on offense. He did the same thing during this Clippers game. I saw it. He called a timeout and he just ran right at Dalton and was like, what are you doing? You know what I mean? And so it's like, it's not, yeah, Dalton, we know in a way it's easier to think about who he is because your mind automatically is like, well, he shoots, he's a scorer. He can score in a variety of ways, but at the end of the day, you have a perimeter shooter, and he can only get so hurt. And Mark Williams is always hurt, and so, but like, look, Dalton had a really nice start for us, but he is not a risk-free asset himself. Like we've seen many rookies, including rookies in recent years, including rookies last year, who had really impressive rookie seasons and then didn't take a next step. And I'm not saying Dalton is not going to do that. I'm just saying that it's not like based on this like initial 40 games of his career where he scored 9 points on 35% shooting from three. Like he had the flashes. We know what he can do. We know how he's probably going to project long term. If everything clicks, like he's going to be a really good scorer and he's going to have a really nice career. That's like, undisputed. But to say that it's like without risk is I think that's, there's risk on both sides with
Yeah,
young players.
but I don't think we even necessarily need to talk about Dalton in this way. Let's just say Dalton pans out and is who he needs to be, okay? Like let's
Right.
talk
And
about
so let's
Mark
say
Williams. Yeah.
let's say Dalton, and then let's say Mark Williams pans out and is who he needs to
Yeah.
be. In that case, you're talking about trading two mid first round pick type of talents, but one is 7'2", and one fills a much bigger position of need. And, frankly, with the roster building moving forward, it wasn't the case that we were going to move Austin now. Um, because unless like we're getting again like another young star of this like 23-ish year old sort of range who's going to be a part of a Luka Doncic team moving forward for the next 5-6 years, we weren't going to move Austin. It was too big of a shift with everything that we do on both. I mean, it's certainly offensively, right? But he's like a core part of the team. Looking forward, where did where was Dalton's minutes going to come? It's not he was already playing 15 minutes a game, and that was before we got Luka Doncic. So, we have four forwards. Vanderbilt's obviously back. All four of those forwards today deserve more minutes. And so it's like when you start listing all these factors out, it's like that's where the extra pick comes into play. If you're doing these both situations click and both guys pan out, and so, you're paying the extra pick for, well, this is a much bigger position of need. And also one guy's 7'2" and one guy's not. So from my perspective, that's actually very fair. I know that like we've sort of calibrated our minds around what the 2031 pick is, but the circumstances are different now, right? And of course, like, well, Luke is not signed until 2031. Yeah, I know, but like there's a path forward, right? With the LeBron AD path, it was like at some point between 2026 and 2030, we're rebuilding. I don't know if it's right away when LeBron retires or later, but there's going to be a rebuild, and that was much more visible. We might not have Luca in 5 years, but that doesn't matter, right? Teams are trading based on an estimate of what's happening today. And I use that same logic when talking about the 2030 pick swap. To me, that's like when people price something at like, 99 cents, but it really costs $1. But it's like, oh, I got this for under $1. It's like almost meaningless value. And when I say that, I mean like it's a pick swap with the Charlotte Hornets. Um, the Charlotte Hornets in the last 2 decades, I mean, I haven't looked this up. Somebody can fact check me on this, but how many times would that swap have panned out for them in the last 2-3 decades? Like 10% of the time, like that we had a worse record than them, right? So again, and by the
I
way,
don't
like
care about the pick swap.
yeah, but that's what I'm saying, right? And so really it's like you're trading Dalton and another first for a guy who's younger than Dalton at a position of need who has upside and size. And so that's the cost of upgrading from a guy who's 6'6" to a guy who's 7'2". A first round pick that's likely going to be late lotto or later, likely, right?
Well, also in the aggregate, if you combine the Luca deal and this one, it just all shakes out fine anyways, and you still actually end up on top. So I'm not really too concerned about the end result of what we got here. I think just in a vacuum, if you were just doing this deal in a vacuum, I think it is an overpay because you may say it's fair, but this is a guy again who has real injury concerns. We're not talking about who pans out, who doesn't pan out, whatever. But with Mark Williams too, and I think the thing that's easier to project out with Dalton Connect is like, oh, he does what he's supposed to do well. Mark Williams is injury prone, but also he doesn't actually necessarily do the rim protecting that he should do well, and isn't like the type of Robert Williams at his healthiest prime, or isn't exactly like the Robert Williams type of defender who's just locked in and has this quick twitch ability defensively and the awareness and has high basketball IQ like a Walker Kessler. So there are more questions, I think, in my mind with a big like this, while still understanding that the upside and the ceiling is like too high to pass up on, especially if you know that you're bringing him into a situation where he has the proper amount of support, not only off the court, but on the court, because he will finally be flanked with, guys like DFS and Jared Vanderbilt and even Rui Hachimura to kind of form this like physical core of lankiness and athleticism, mobility, kind of in the same way that we've seen Rui Hachimura be elevated on both ends of the court by Jared Vanderbilt and DFS's arrival in the last few games. I kind of anticipate that for Mark Williams, and I think his deficiencies defensively will be sort of shored up by these other wings, while also these other wings will help maximize what he does best, which is crashing the glass, both on the defensive end and the offensive end. Him being a great weak side shot blocker, even though he's not necessarily a good, rim protector when guys go at him. But having said that, before we take it to break, specifically, what have you sort of gleaned from Mark Williams' game? He's 7 foot, legit 7 foot, 7'2" with shoes on, 7'7" wingspan. Um, the things that stood out to me about Mark Williams is just the fact that he's actually a pretty good offensive center. And from the offensive side of the ball, I think he's like the perfect lob threat and finisher next to Luka. Now, he's not like what's it called? He's not like a Nick Claxton lob threat or a DeAndre Jordan lob threat, but because of his 7'7" wingspan, as long as it's near the basket, he's catching the ball all the time. And he's a very like ferocious and powerful finisher. Like, I've never seen the term sledgehammer come to life more than when I watched Mark Williams slam the ball down with such force and power using his crazy 7'7" wingspan. And then on top of that, he has surprisingly good touch in the paint when it comes to these short hook shots. And he likes to do this like little mid range floater push shot that he can hit pretty consistently, like around the free throw line as well. So on the offensive end, I actually don't. He's actually improved leaps and bounds from how he was coming out of Duke. Defensively, he's actually regressed from how he was at Duke. I was watching a scouting video of him when he was at Duke, and he was much more athletic and mobile and more aware around him. I'm not sure what happened. Maybe it's the injuries that piled up that's kind of zapped him from being like 100% all the time. But yeah, what do you like about what you've seen from Mark Williams' tape so far?
Yeah, so I think Williams he's so clearly talented with so much potential and upside here that like, you don't get a guy like this for the price we got him for, unless there are some off or non-basketball, I should say, related concerns normally. And I think, the concern here would be his health, as you mentioned. But that said, right, like we're all looking at a stat sheet, we're all looking at Twitter, we're looking at publicly available information. According to the Lakers, per Ramona and others reporting, they diligenced his health, right? So I'm not going to pretend like I know more about what the team doctors who advised Rob and had access to the medical records, like, know about his injuries. They clearly were not concerned enough to offer, to your point earlier, our best probably young asset. Other than Austin, maybe if you can count Austin as one of our young assets and our first round pick. So, but thinking about him on the court, that's the thing. His offense is the thing that was more surprising to me. He's actually super, super adept offensively. You don't accidentally score 38 points. You don't accidentally, which he did a couple weeks ago, I think against Boston. I forget, but you don't accidentally score 34 on Walker Kessler. Like, if part of it is he is just a massive human being, right? But size wins in the NBA, as we've been saying for years and years, and are pleased to like get a big guy next to AD. And so, you know, offensively, his measurables, I mean, we talked about the 7'6" wingspan. He's got a 9'9" standing reach. So part of the reason he doesn't need to explode off the ground is because he's 3 inches away from just dunking the ball without even
Yeah.
jumping, you know? So like he just, and it's not just like he's got sort of a, I don't want to call it lanky, but he's not built like Shaquille O'Neal, you know what I mean? He's not like a big guy, but he plays with so much force and power. And by the way, like keep in mind, we got a 23-year-old who's like a developing project. He's not like all the way there yet. Um, and so I think offensively, one thing that's going to be very beneficial for him and his development with the team is you have to be able to give something. You can't just be completely dead weight on one side of the court. And so the fact that he can contribute something right away offensively, I think is going to help him stay on the floor and get the reps defensively that he needs to improve on that end. I don't think that he's got some sort of, you know, mental block that's going to prevent him from developing into a good defender. He's got all the physical tools. He was a good defender at Duke. And I think like folks kind of forget like playing, you know, I'm not going to trash on Charlotte specifically, but when you're playing on a rebuilding team, and the Hornets are, you know, have been in this sort of rebuild, like they've been bad for a long time, right? So you the focus is like not necessarily like, okay, Mark Williams, you have to go and like play fundamentally sound defense. And we don't know how he's been coached up or what they're telling him to do. I mean, clearly they're relying on him to score a little bit, or he at least is scoring a little bit. So, you know, maybe he's more focused on that right now. PJ Washington was not known as like a lockdown elite defender before he got traded, and he had been in the league for a lot longer than Williams with the Hornets. Um, Daniel Gafford was not known. I mean, like both of these guys were like athletic and they've checked all the boxes, and people were like, yeah, their defense is solid, but it's like they go to Dallas and all of a sudden they're the two primary defenders on the floor, maybe with Jaren Jackson Jr., and then those three are able to carry a team of five, you know, to like one of the most elite defenses in the NBA. So you know, I'm not saying just the scenery change is going to suddenly make this guy remember how to play defense. I just think that like these are things to keep in mind. The interesting thing about his defensive metrics is that his overall defensive impact metrics, if you look at like Crangis's stats, are actually very good. Um,
Mhm.
Weirdly, he is like, you know, way below par, way below what you'd expect as like a pure rim protector. And so that we'll just have to see, right? It's like, but until we see him in the games, it's just hard to say why that's the case. Because
So I watched a lot of his tape actually, and
yeah, go ahead.
well, no, I've watched several games, and I watched him in Duke too. There is a lot of coaching that needs to be done, and I'm realizing more and more as we scout more and more of these players just how integral like basketball IQ and awareness is. Because while he is very athletic and he has these freakish measurables, he almost always tries to block shots very wildly at all times without really any notion of the consequence of that if he's out of position. And so his defensive fundamentals are very poor, surprisingly, especially since he came from Duke. Maybe we blame that on the scheme that the Charlotte Hornets were running, but he is often, and I kind of mentioned it on Twitter. I hope people don't misconstrue this, but he kind of looks like Rui Hachimura sometimes on defense, where it's like you see this big, bulky, physical dude, and you're like, why are you so out of position? And then why, when people are coming right at you, like you're not able to stop the shot for whatever reason. And I honestly think it's him. Like literally, he will try and flail his arms in the air to get the block shot instead of just standing his ground or using his verticality. For someone who's 7'7" with that type of standing reach, you honestly don't really have to do that much to affect a person's shot. But I think for him, it's kind of like just getting rid of like the histrionics and trying to prove you're a shot blocker, which ironically, he doesn't even get that many. His like block rate since he came into the NBA is super low. He's only averaging like one block a game, whereas his last season in Duke he was averaging 2.8 blocks. And so I don't know if maybe he hasn't properly recalibrated the transition into the NBA and just focusing on becoming a solid positional defender. But right now, he is a very weak back line for the Charlotte Hornets, who, they don't do him very many favors because most of the guards are letting the other team's primary offensive players just waltz into the lane. But, once they get there, I think his biggest problem too defensively is he just doesn't have that like second jump effort that you'd expect from like a very high motor defensive player. Like his motor waxes and wanes when he's like gobbling up rebounds. You're like, this guy's unstoppable. But then at times you see him jogging back and he's literally like Jay Huff will beat him all the way down the court for like an open dunk, or he'll like contest one shot and then the other team will get the offensive rebound and he won't go up to contest the next shot. It's like those types of things I think he can. Well, I don't know. I don't know about the motor thing. I think just him being more like fundamentally sound defensively is definitely something that he can work on. And the coaching staff just telling him like, hey, you don't have to do too much. You're a big ass dude. You eat up space in the paint. Just put your hands up. Just be in the right spots defensively, especially with JJ Redick's defensive scheme. So I think those things will naturally just work itself out. I will say he doesn't have great lateral speed too, so that's something to keep in mind. But not many bigs do. But the measurables are there. The pedigree is there from his time at Duke. It's just about putting it all together for him now. The other thing I'll say about his offensive game and why he's able to put up this many points, Tommy, is the fact that he's a really good free throw shooter for a big man. I was looking at his 38-point game, and he hit 13 of 15 from the stripe. And then his 34-point game, he hit 9 of 10 from the stripe. So like having a big man who can actually shoot free throws, I think is a very underrated aspect of Mark Williams' game that will keep him on the floor more often than not. And the fact I honestly don't want him to play more than 30 minutes a game, but the fact that he's played like 25 to 28 minutes a game in his early NBA career and he's putting up these insane offensive rebounding numbers, like he's averaging 3.4 offensive rebounds this year. He averaged 4 offensive rebounds last year. In his career, Anthony Davis averages 2.7 offensive rebounds in more minutes than Mark Williams. So like there are some outliery things about Mark Williams that you can really focus in on, and you begin to understand more why the Lakers sort of made this bet and gamble. So any last thoughts on Mark Williams' game?
Yeah, I think the last thought is on the defensive side, I just need to see it in practice in real games. The highlights, like Anthony Davis's second team All NBA defense last year, we could put together a highlight reel of him loafing around this year. I mean, there have been multiple games where we both
No,
said,
I'm telling you, I'm
no, no,
telling you
I'm
though.
not saying,
I've
I'm
done
not
my
saying
research. Multiple people. It's
well,
bad.
I know. And look, the Hornets fans, like, you read their scouting reports and they're like, well, if based on what I'm seeing, it's like his rim defense metrics may not flash as much as Kessler's, but it's because he doesn't contest every shot, not that he's contesting. So I guess what I'm saying is that until we see him for a big enough sample size ourselves, in real game action, not just like clips, right? And so that's what's it's going to have to be the next 30 games to see what we're really working with. Because other than that, all we have are the impact metrics. And so something is disconnecting there because the impact metrics say he's not bad. But then the rim protection numbers say he's very bad at rim protecting. So there's something is happening there.
But there are people that have like I listened to several different scouting reports of his 38-point game of people who actually broke it down, and then I watched every clip myself of like the opposing offense was doing to him. And so for me, I'm lining up like, oh, this is how other teams score on him at the rim. Now, the one thing that I didn't mention, or maybe I didn't articulate well, is the fact that when he's on the court, though, the amount of attempts at the rim lowers when he's on the court, which means obviously he's an impediment and teams don't want to take it into the paint because he's in there. But the times when it's one-on-one with him, like teams are shooting like 65% on him in the paint, which is really bad, you know? But at the same time, you're also like, okay, but he's also stopping them from putting up a high volume of shots at the rim as well. So you take the good with the bad here, but I just want to warn people, you don't need to like, there's no discrepancy in the stats, in my opinion. Like, he has a lot to work on defensively. As long as people understand that he's not a finished product and he's pretty raw defensively, but he has the tools to compete, then I think you won't be as surprised when you're like, wait, why is this guy like, why is his reaction timing so slow? You
Well,
know?
I
So
think the discrepancy in the stats is he's like an A defensive impact rating, but a F at rim protecting. I think that's what I need to watch to figure out, well, why is this happening and whether it's meaningful, based on the type of defense we're trying to play. But you know, we'll see what happens on that front. I don't think it'll take long. I mean, after a month, if he plays consistently, it'll probably be pretty easy to tell. But I think again, still at the end of the day, we traded a very negative defensive asset for a guy who's probably like I, I mean, even if we want to call him a negative asset, he's better than certainly than Dalton, and he fills a position of need. So I think he was able to. It's not that he has not never shown an interest in playing defense, and so to your point, I think coaching does play a huge role, and I think we're going to have to see if this coaching staff can and I have no doubt they will be able to get him to buy in because I suspect in many ways they will seek to use him defensively the same way that they may have been thinking they would try to use Walker Kessler defensively if we were able to acquire him, in terms of just the size profile, not in terms of who's the more developed defensive prospect today.
yeah, for sure. Okay, let me take it to break real quick, and then we'll come back and close it out really fast by talking about more about Robbie P and giving him his flowers, and maybe the whole team, or talk about the whole team as well. But first, let's talk about our sponsor, Underdog Fantasy, because with the big game between the Eagles and Chiefs coming up this Sunday, now is the best time to jump into some fantasy prop betting with the Underdog Fantasy app. Underdog is the best place to cash in on all your takes during the playoffs, which players are going off and which ones are ice cold. With their pick'em game, you could win up to 1,000 times your money just by choosing higher or lower on player stats, i.e., yards, touchdowns, interceptions, and more. Think Luka Doncic will score higher than 25.5 points in his Lakers debut this Saturday. Well, then, cook up some fire entries for a shot to win real cash prizes all NBA season long, all NFL playoffs long. There's no more NFL playoffs, just one more game. But create entries with all football picks or mix and match across your other favorite sports. Underdog is the only pick 'em platform that puts the power to cash out in your hands. Now you can either keep riding with your entry or tap the win now button to cash out whenever you want. So when it comes to Lakers bets, I would actually look at the Saturday game versus the Indiana Pacers, Luka Doncic's supposed debut, and I would take the higher on Luka Doncic's assist prop because I think he'll want to get himself acclimated first and be a good team player. So if the line is at 7.5 or 8.5 assists, I would definitely take the higher. So yeah, what are you waiting for? Underdog is the best place to play Pick'em, so download the app, sign up with promo code LEGACY, and deposit now to get up to $1,000 in bonus cash instantly. That's promo code LEGACY. Deposit now to get up to $1,000 in bonus cash instantly. Must be 18 years or older, 19 years or older in Alabama and Nebraska, 19 years or older in Colorado for some games, 21 years or older in Massachusetts and Arizona, and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Void in Colorado for some games. Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.ncpgambling.org. In Arizona, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT STEP to 53342. In New York, call the 24/7 Hope line at 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467369. All right, let's pitch it to our sponsors, and then when we come back, let's talk more 2025 NBA trade deadline. All right, so we are back. Tommy, what is this team? What is this team to you? The team's identity has shifted tenfold. In an alternate universe, if Anthony Davis was on this team alongside Mark Williams, I also think we would have had a pretty good shot at winning the championship. And to be honest with you, like you had been pitching me on this like all defense identity of this team for a while now, and I was like, I don't know, I kind of want a more balanced team. I want some offensive players, and now seeing that we had gone out and were able to acquire Anthony Davis's desire in a starting caliber center, I'm like, I wonder what the all defense unit would have looked like because we kind of have it. But now we have, in an ironic way, kind of looped back around and are a more balanced offensive unit as well. So, what are your quick thoughts on like what this team looks like? Because the other reason why I want to give so much credit to Rob is the fact that there were a lot of changes, but at the same time, he was still able to maintain as much of the remaining core as possible and not dump Rui Hachimura for nothing and all of the stupid players that fans were throwing him in trade machines for. And also not dump Gabe Vincent for nothing as well, because these players have proven to be very integral to the team as a whole. And I give Rob Pelinka credit for seeing that, even when, half this fan base was like, dump Rui, dump Gabe for the new bad flavor of the week. And now you kind of see um, something coalescing here on a more balanced level, even though, I also think the all defense timeline would have worked pretty well as well.
So I think this group, you know, obviously we have a few specialists. We have a few offensive specialists. We have a few more defensive minded guys. But I think the overall identity is just going to be length and athleticism. Um, our oldest guy is 40 and he's one of our best athletes, actually. But besides him, it's like you have DFS is 31. Everyone else on the roster, certainly I can't, maybe I'm forgetting someone. I'm going to not count Markeith in this. Everybody who's actually going to play is between like 23 and 28. Um, and they're long and we have pretty good size. We have four very playable forwards who are all like 6'8", with length and athleticism, as I mentioned. We have two bigs who are true 7-footers. Um, you know, at the guard, we're big with Luca. Austin is not a small point guard. Gabe is a small point guard for when we need someone, and he's more defensive minded for when we need someone to sort of chase around quicker players. Um, I think top to bottom, we are so much more balanced now than we were at the beginning of the season. I think, one thing here that's like interesting, right, is like I actually think it's like not that easy to build a team uh around AD and LeBron. I think we did it that first year, and that sort of model worked at that time. I think we could have won again this year with those two guys in a similar model, but I think the thing with AD is, he's a four. He wants to play the four, and he wants to play with a true five, but the number of true fives out there who can shoot are so limited. And so you're playing him with big fives, like a guy like Mark Williams we could have gotten, for example, even if we still had AD. And, the issue though is that you're also playing with LeBron. And so like eventually you hit a point where the individual impact of all of these guys who sort of want to play in the paint and play physically, and they start to get individually diminished. And so I feel like we don't have any of that happening right now. We have like a really really good balance of different types of players. And then, convert incidentally, I think AD actually ended up in a much better situation for his specific skill set than what we would have been able to build here, with him still here. I so yeah, I mean, I'm really, really, really excited and interested to see what happens. I think, post trade, post Luca trade, I should say, everyone's immediate reaction was, well, I guess this means a punt on this year, and then we'll see what happens. But then we were able to get a starting caliber center without trading DFS, Rui, Vando, Austin, Gabe. Like, I mean, even Jackson Hayes. So like, we have real NBA players on this team. We have a good amount, and we suddenly went from like, I don't know about our depth to like, we have pretty good depth. I mean, like, we're talking about maybe adding, I mean, we did clear up a roster spot with the Williams trade as well. So, you value that as like a second, I guess, because normally you have to pay a second to dump one of those guys. Um, but and there's talks about who we're going to look at on the waiver wire and things like that, right? Whoever we sign, this is not like previous years where it's like we come out of the trade deadline and we're looking to sign like a core rotational player off of waivers. Um,
Yeah, it's cherry on top of the
it's
Sunday
it's
time now.
cherry on top of the Sunday time. Like whoever we sign is going to be our 10th guy, like 10th best player at best. And you know, JJ has already said multiple times we want to play a 9-man rotation. So it's like we've set ourselves up really nicely here. We do need a defensive guard. They know they need a defensive guard. That's been all the talk and the rumors is like, oh, they're going to be scouring the waiver wire for a defensive guard. Like that's like you want one of those guys for depth purposes. But this is the first time since like 2019, 2020 season trade deadline where it's like, okay, you know, we anything we add at this point, adding Markeith off waivers was like cherry on top of the sundae. I mean, he ended up becoming a key rotation player, but we weren't out there like, okay, we have this drastic need, and if we don't find somebody who fits this specific mold at this specific position, we're just rolling through the rest of the season with a giant, hole there.
Mhm.
We somehow got Luca and still addressed the other major hole because a center like Mark, not even close to Mark Williams caliber, is, you know, no one like that is becoming available in free agency, so or in on the waiver wire or in free agency in the summer. So you took care of that need now, and it's like, okay, finding a defensive guard. I'm not again trying to suggest it's easy, but all of these guys I just mentioned who are role players, like with the exception of DFS, who we have full bird rights on, they're all under contract for next year too. So
Yeah.
this is like, I don't know that Rob could have done a better job of putting together a team given the resources and given the other trades we saw
Well,
made, by the way.
yeah, and I'm so excited to see. We've already seen just how much Rui has grown being alongside LeBron James. I'm so excited to see how much more Rui can grow alongside two LeBron Jameses, with that high basketball IQ. And you can sort of just see the elevation happening for guys like Mark Williams, who apparently can already put up 38 points without Luka Doncic. What's going to happen with Luka Doncic and LeBron? So like the possibilities are very tantalizing. Lastly, I just want to go back to Rob Pelinka again and just I'm going to give my spiel and then I'll give you final word if you want to add anything on top of that, because I know fans, especially the fans who have clutched their pearls this entire last year, talking about how Rob Pelinka doesn't do anything. What's he doing, like in his office, just fiddling around with his balls or something? Sorry for the the gross graphic, but I just know people are going to find ways to discredit Pelinka and say that he wouldn't have been able to pull this off if it weren't for Nico Harrison. He wouldn't have been able to pull this off if the Charlotte Hornets hadn't coveted Connect the way that they did. These things just fell into his lap, and all he needed to do was say yes. And okay, let's work with that premise, right? Let's discredit him on all of those things. Well, let's look back in the last year. Guess what else Rob Pelinka wouldn't have been able to pull off if he had done some of the stupid ass deals that fans were projecting? Rob Pelinka also wouldn't have been able to pull this off if he had traded the 2029 first last trade deadline for DFS and Royce O'Neal. He also wouldn't have been able to pull this off if he had traded both firsts for Jeremy Grant this past September. He also wouldn't have been able to pull this off if he had traded the number 17th pick that became Dalton Connect for Bruce Brown on draft day. So, yeah, there were a lot of things that Rob Pelinka didn't do this past year in the name of patience that actually helped him pull these deals off when opportunity came knocking at his door. And we are going to give him damn credit for it. And this is what I've been talking about this entire past year. Patience will pay off. I did not envision it. I did not envision it paying off in such a ridiculous home run type of way, but I've been saying it since last trade deadline. We are going to have a 2023 trade deadline redux, but maybe even better because we have better assets. We actually have younger players who have shown promise and are on better contracts. I saw this coming. I was starting to get a little bit hesitant as we kept moving down to this trade deadline, especially because the echo chamber of fans were starting to pile up in my head. But lo and behold, Rob Pelinka pulled a rabbit out of his ass or rabbit out of his hat or whatever the idiom is. But yeah, that's just what I want to lay out here. We like Rob Pelinka deserves the credit, even if you don't think that he does, because these deals quote unquote fell in his lap. It was all the things that he didn't do shrewdly that led us to this point. So any last words that you want to add?
Yeah, I think this deadline should be a really good lesson to a lot of people moving forward. I think there is this like inherent almost toxicity amongst Laker fans, and I think it's perpetuated by the fact that there are so many non-Laker fan haters out there. uh, non-Laker fans who are haters, I should say. But, you know, we've clearly, in some cases, internally undervalued our own players and assets. For all the talk of like overvaluing it just like, I guess the point I'm trying to make here is we don't know the relative value of these guys better than the front office does. We just don't because we're not involved in all of the conversations. We just see rumors on Twitter. Rumors are leaked for a variety of reasons, sometimes because things were actually being discussed, sometimes not. Um, and so, we just we have to be mindful of that, and we have to like be more patient. And I think in this case, right, it's like you gave a bunch of good examples of situations where people were trying to sell the farm of assets for like mediocre role players who wouldn't move the needle. Guys who, by the way, were eventually moved and haven't really been able to help their teams that they like got to, right? And so it's like Rob seems to know. Part of the rationale with hiring him in the beginning was he seemed to have a good pulse on what the value of guys was. He's made some bad moves, as has, every GM in the NBA has made some bad moves. Um, we're in this sort of culture online where it's like a deal happens and everyone has to say one side got fleeced or the other, right? And,
Yeah.
it can't be the case that two sides made a trade that made sense for both. And so, all of this is a long way of saying, I guess, like there are a lot of things we don't know. We have to, if we're going to praise results that are negative, or sorry, criticize for results that are negative, we have to praise results that are positive. We don't take process into account when the results are negative. So we have, why are we going to focus on what our perception of process was when the results are positive? It's just a way to like not give him credit when it's owed, but then put him down when, something bad happens. And so, I think Rob, his patience paid off. That's extremely, extremely clear. It's like really interesting the timing of everything because it did feel like multiple times there were situations where we might burn one or two picks. Like I assume we weren't offering both, I guess in hindsight, both of our firsts for Kessler. But like what if we had, right? We were desperate for a center, AD
Mhm.
got hurt, and we did. Does the Luka trade even happen? I don't know. So it's like, um, having patience, I think, was good here, and we give these guys props because I think, as we've discussed many times over the years, usually good process leads to good results, or at least results that you can be satisfied with. And from the beginning of the offseason last year, the process has been good. From, how the type of coach we hired, the types of, the player we got in the draft. We obviously weren't a big player in free agency, but again, the patience of not like burning assets just to like dump Cam Reddish, who ended up playing like a pretty key role for us for a couple months when we had a ton of injuries. Things like that, like not dumping Jackson Hayes for no reason because everybody thought he sucked, even though he's been like objectively a very solid backup center for us,
Mhm.
and certainly not worse than anyone we could have gotten. So, patience pays off, and accept that there are folks out there who may have more information than we do, and it's okay if they're right sometimes.
Yeah, patience pays off, but also the ability to discern what's a good deal and what's not. And I think ever since the Russell Westbrook trade, Rob Pelinka has shown his ability to improve and take information and actually work upon it, even if you don't like the last year where there two or three transaction cycles happened and nothing happened, because he remembers what he did in the Russell Westbrook deal. He panicked. He gave up too many picks. Thank God we did not do that this last year so that we could eventually end up in this place where Rob has somehow brought the future to the present and we are in the new era all of a sudden. I don't know, it's still crazy to wrap your head around it, the fact that we are so different now than we were yesterday as like a franchise. And honestly, it's not going to hit us until we see Luka Doncic in a purple and gold uniform on Saturday, and then it's off to the races from there. And yeah, credit Rob Pelinka, Robbie P. was cooking in the kitchen all this time. He just needed to let it marinate for a very, very long time, but it paid off and the chicken tastes mighty yummy. All right. With that said, that'll do it for this episode. Thank you guys for listening. Follow us on Twitter at Lakers Legacy Pod. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. And yeah, the next time we talk, we'll be talking about Luka Doncic actually playing basketball in a Lakers jersey. It's crazy. All right, Tommy, I will see you later.
Peace.
Laters.